welcome to another edition of This Week in Cleantech. We're already having a laugh. At my expense, I'll be honest. I got the worst haircut of my life this week. I'm not going to name names. I'm not going to leave a bad review. I'm going to learn from my lesson and not go back there. Anyway, you're not at the barbershop. You're listening to a podcast. It's called This Week in Cleantech. It's a factor of this podcast. We do it every Friday. It's a 15-minute roundup of the biggest stories in climate and clean energy every week. This is Friday, May 1st, turn of a new month. In 2026, we got a returning guest on the horn. Oliver Milman from The Guardian is waiting on standby right now. If you don't know me by now, I'm Factor This content director, Paul Gerke, alongside Cleantech commentator Mike Casey of Tigercomm. Mike, I'm glad that I could provide a little humor at my own expense for you.
I don't know what's funnier, your bad haircut that had you look like Keith Moon or Brian Mendez cackling about it, because Mendez is a strategic cackler. He gets that cackle going right before he does the countdown, and then we're left trying to suppress the guffaws that result. So this is more backstage drama that our listeners and viewers want to hear every week, I'm certain, because they tell me about it. There you go. All right, Paul Gerke.
When he gets going, it's tough because then we all get going. Once you get going, then it's tough for me to rein it in anyway. The point of the matter is we have some fun on the show, despite what Mike tells every guest in the lobby, that this is a very serious and buttoned up program. We love to hear from the viewers and the listeners. I've gotten some emails and some LinkedIn messages recently. Appreciate all of you for reaching out about the show. If you have a story you want to see on it or 2 cents to share, just email us. The email address is twictwick@tigercomm with 2ms.us. We've got 5 stories lined up for you this week. Let's start with the first one, Mike.
And, you might have heard of the New York Times.
I have.
There's a heat map editor who writes for him. His name is Robinson Meyer. We laud his coverage often. He put together this really cool package. Why is your electric bill going up? Blame the broken grid, Paul.
Yeah, that's an SEO dream right now. For someone who works in like article analytics, that title is going to perform really well for the New York Times. Smart guy, Robinson Meyer. So the gist of this one is something you already know listening to this program. Electricity costs are out of control right now. They're America's second largest energy expense after gasoline. If you live in the Great Lakes states, you're nodding your head in agreement right now after what happened to gas prices over the last day or so. Prices poised to keep climbing as demand hits record high for the first time in over a decade. For most of American history, electricity demand has grown alongside the economy, and it's been pretty slow. But that pattern started to break in the mid-2000s with an efficient shift to LED lighting that was so impactful that it kept demand flat for like 15 years, even as the economy grew. But as you know, that era is behind us now, and we're in this surge for EVs and electrification and AI and data centers. But there's a multi-pronged problem here. It's not just a supply and demand issue. Aging infrastructure, natural disasters, global price shocks, the war in Iran, lots of complications here, led by data centers, which are increasingly trying to bypass the grid with their own on-site power plants. And the longer this goes on, the more of an issue it becomes. Transmission takes time, interconnection takes time. We've got some problems all over the place. Mike, your thoughts on this as electricity demand continues to increase?
Yeah, so Robinson, he's got some interesting arguments here. He says we should actually welcome rising electricity demand because big new customers can actually lower costs for everyone by covering more of the grid's shared expenses. And he points out that states with the biggest demand growth, North Dakota, New Mexico, for example, they've seen prices stay flat or drop, where states where demand fell, like California or Maine, they actually saw the steepest price hike. So more demand can actually mean lower bills. Counterintuitive, obviously. He also argues that rather than blocking data centers, communities should harness their massive investment appetite to modernize the grid for everyone. He calls it a generational opportunity, which I got to tell you, with all the pushback against data centers, I know that could fall on unfriendly ears, we'll say. But he says, basically, let's treat the grid like an interstate highway system. It's critical infrastructure that's worth real public investment. So he has a list of things he advocates. I just found this a fascinating piece. So hats off to Robinson. Paul, story number 2.
Yeah, go read the piece if you want to see that full list. We're trying to keep things to 15 minutes here. Story number 2. By repeat, this week in Cleantech guests, Jennifer McDermott and Matthew Daly from the AP. We just republished this one on Factor This. Trump administration to pay 2 more companies to walk away from U.S. Offshore wind leases. Mike, we heard about the first iteration of this a couple weeks ago. What's changed?
We're doubling down on stupid. That's what's changed.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense.
Because if you're an insolvent country like we are, and you need more power like we do, the smart thing to do is to hand taxpayer money to energy generators to walk away from projects that could produce energy.
That they've already invested hundreds of millions of dollars into, by the way.
Yeah, it's good. So anyway, we could just get into the details of the stupidity. Let's just quickly let's fly over the country here. The Interior Department said Blue Point Wind off New Jersey and New York and Golden State Wind off California Central Coast will surrender their leases for nearly $900 million. Neither company will pursue any new offshore wind projects in the U.S.
What, is that a good deal? Was that negotiated? We're going to give them money to not build? Seriously?
Yeah. Yes. So each project was expected to be capable of powering more than 1 million homes when completed. So I just, I think we're at a saturation point on this show for covering the ongoing clown show that seems to be federal policy.
But then it just gets more saturated, man.
Yeah,
it's like my daughter's diapers. You think they can't hold any more piss, and it just keeps getting soaked up. And that's what I feel like, especially with offshore wind. You don't think we could hold any more piss in, and then here it comes, Okay,
well, better to be pissed. I don't even want to go there.
I lured you into the deep water. Are you coming in or not?
No, I'm getting out. Do your piece on this, though. Let's go to story number 3, Paul. My gosh.
Story number 3.
Whew.
Story number 3 this week by Simon Mundy from the Financial Times, titled "Why Electricity Markets Are Stuck on the Gas Price Roller Coaster." So, Mike,
if you can not be pissy, why don't you go first on this show? But don't be pissy. All right, go ahead.
European wholesale electricity prices are swinging all over the place right now. If you're paying attention over there, Germany just hit a record low of minus 414 euros per megawatt hour when solar and wind flooded the grid. But when renewables and nuclear fall short, expensive gas plants kick in and prices go way up, and that's been exacerbated by what's happening in the Middle East right now. Gas only generates a quarter of UK electricity, less than a fifth in the EU, but it still sets the price for the whole market most of the time because that price disparity is so drastic. Part of the issue is that the European electricity markets use marginal pricing. Renewables bid low, gas bids high, and then the grid takes the cheapest bids first, but everyone gets that final highest price. So even though renewable energy is cheap to produce, as long as that gas lingers around, it's going to bring up the price of everything with it, Mike.
So the UK looked at zonal pricing, that's the term, splitting into regional markets with their own prices, but rejected it last year, saying it would create too much uncertainty and could be passed on to consumers as higher prices. So instead, the UK is expanding fixed price contracts so that already operating renewable energy plants can sell power outside that wholesale market. That would reduce exposure to gas price spikes, but gas is still forecast to set the UK wholesale electricity price about half the time in 2030. So the EU is facing the same debate. Options on the table include subsidizing gas plants or splitting renewable and non-renewable power into separate markets. There is resistance. Last week, the European Commission proposed measures with no mention of market restructuring. Spain shows what's possible when renewables dominate. Gas sets the electricity price only 15% of the time versus 89% in Italy, and the average wholesale prices there are 43 euros versus 128 euros. So, there's no easy answers here. It's just a race to build enough clean energy, grid infrastructure, and storage to reduce gas impact on power prices. Paul, our fourth story.
Our fourth story this week from Francesca Paris, another one from the New York Times, titled "The Rise of the High-Range, Less Expensive EV." We talk a lot about this stuff on the show, Mike. What's in this story?
Yeah, haters be damned, because here they come.
Log off, haters.
The new EV sales in the U.S. have slumped. The Trump administration ended the $7,500 tax credit, and manufacturers are canceling models because why lean into the future? But one corner of the market is actually growing: affordable, long-range EVs. A decade ago, range and price were tightly linked. If you wanted to go far, you had to spend a lot. That is no longer true. Today, there are over a dozen models that offer more than 250 miles of range for under $40,000. In 2021, you could count them on one hand. Driving force behind all this is battery technology. Lithium-ion battery prices have dropped from $1,000 per kilowatt hour in the early 2010s to around $100 in 2025. That's a 90% price reduction. And the energy density has also improved, Paul. What do you think?
I got some news for the haters. It's a better mousetrap. And we know that, and I think a lot of consumers know that. And I think when you have a whole market full of options that have that 250 to 300 mile range, which is really what most Americans need on a day-to-day, I think that it eventually will displace gasoline vehicles. It's just, quite frankly, a better mousetrap. Overall, new EV sales are dropping, though. You're not imagining that. Down about 27% from early 2025 to early 26. That's because of that tax credit, though. But the affordable long-range segment actually held up better than its contemporary. Some models growing in sales. I was reading a story about how Chinese projects like the BYD stuff, Mike, the long-range EVs, are starting to show up in California because it's legal for folks in Mexico to buy them and then commute across the border to work in the United States. So Californians are seeing firsthand from some Mexican citizens what's possible in the EV space and wondering what is going on here in the States. Why can't we have any of this cool stuff? Just a matter of time before we get there, Mike.
Okay, our last story is by our returning guest, Oliver Milman from The Guardian, who is not feeling pissy, Paul Gerke, because he writes, Trump's attempt to crush clean energy progress, not going to plan, experts say. Oliver, you are like a breath of good news here with this headline. So I want you to tell our listeners and our viewers, if they haven't read the story, which we want them to do, what is the big takeaway?
Sure. Hi there, Mike and Paul. So essentially, not to kind of downplay any of the other kind of bad news that is swirling around, we're not short of it. And as you mentioned there, the Trump administration has been, continues to be aggressive in trying to shut down the clean energy industry, even paying developers not to develop their projects. But the market forces and the kind of global shift to clean energy seems to be undeniable and unstoppable, even for the power of the presidency. So we saw last month in March, the US produce more electricity from renewable sources than from gas for the first time. And that's just a single month. But if you look over what's going to be happening the rest of this year, we're still on track for 93% of new power grid additions coming online in the US are going to be clean. Just 7% are going to be kind of fossil fuels, mainly gas. That kind of record year for renewables last year, of course. And then the world is kind of moving in this direction, and it seems to ironically been accelerated by the war in Iran that Donald Trump launched with Israel. Countries are now kind of doubling down on clean energy because they just want to get away from the kind of horrible price volatility of fossil fuels. So you're seeing all of these things kind of combine to kind of really thwart Trump, as well as the courts. So last week, the administration had a setback in the courts, the federal court in Massachusetts, that said, we're going to put a kind of temporary pause on your halt of clean energy projects, these kind of various barriers that the administration is kind of throwing up. That kind of got swept aside by a judge. And obviously these offshore wind farms as well that the administration tried to stop too, that's been kind of thwarted in court as well, that those are going to resume. So you're seeing all of these things come together to kind of give a bit of glimmer of hope to an clean energy sector that felt a little bit under siege for a while. Still does, I think, but certainly there was some optimism being voiced by those I spoke to for the piece.
I'm glad that you brought up the court system, because that's where I think everything gets funneled through ultimately is these orders to stop work on projects that have already been permitted are illegal. The orders to stop building on federal lands for these companies that have already received permission to do so are illegal. And it's just a matter of time before the judges get their teeth into it and put injunctions on these orders. But that takes time. And Oliver, as you know about the U.S. grid right now, time is not on our side. Every element that slows down progress ultimately hurts us doubly, triply, quadruply on the back end because it's going to take that much longer to get gigawatts onto the grid. In your reporting, is this all driven through fossil fuel lobbying, or is there some other like legitimate concern about getting renewables on the grid in the Trump administration, other than apparently he doesn't like the way that windmills look, as he puts it?
Yeah, I mean, when you ask people for reasons, there's no kind of coherent answer really why. And if you look at the reasons the administration gives to try and stop these things, it's, renewables are unreliable. There's national security risks for having offshore farms, all these kind of things. But when you hear the president himself speak, it's like, they're ugly. I don't like the look of them. They're garbage. They litter the environment, all these kind of things. It's a very kind of personal, visceral dislike that seems to be driving a lot of this. Not much logic behind it. And even towards their own stated aims, right, of energy dominance, lowering costs for consumers. If you wanted energy dominance and lowering costs for consumers, you would be allowing the kind of traditional Republican, all of the above approach, right, of allowing as much new stuff as possible. And the cheapest and quickest stuff at the moment is, of course, clean energy. So you'd be encouraging that, especially with what's going on with Iran and the kind of the global oil price and gasoline prices that Americans are now facing. So there is no kind of coherent logic behind it. I think ultimately it comes down to the fact that Donald Trump did not like the look of those wind turbines off his golf course in Scotland all those years ago, and is now wreaking his revenge upon that industry.
Well, that would be that's a short way of rephrasing Oliver's answer to your question. So, Paul, we could talk to Oliver all day about this, and I would like to because I love this story. But we should go to our Cleantecher of the week because we're almost at 15 minutes, almost staying out of there.
All right, let's do it. If you haven't checked out Oliver's story yet, go do so. This week's Cleantecher of the Week, Sean Park, CEO of Point2. So data centers, they rely heavily on copper cables. What doesn't these days? But copper has physical limits on efficiency. It's subject to major price swings like gasoline we were talking about. Point2 has found a way to transmit data using radio waves through plastic materials instead, cutting out the use of copper entirely. The company claims this halves power consumption compared to traditional high-speed copper cables. Sounds cool, sounds promising. Congrats, Sean Park, CEO of Point2, our Cleantecher of the week.
We want to thank our occasionally wonderful producer, Brian Mendez, but the always wonderful Claire Quirin and Alex Peterson for helping gather these stories.
And to Oliver Milman for stopping by this week. I really love to see it. Thank you for sharing insights about the story. And like I said, go check it out if you haven't already. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, leave a little feedback, share story suggestions if you like. We mentioned our email at the top of the show. You can also read every article we talk about each week. There are links in the episode description as well as in the post where this lives on factorthis.com. Until next time, be good, people.